going to talk to you today about four things, four very simple things that we have all been dealing with the past, well, actually, it seems like it's been a long time, but it's sort of ascended to a shriek, for the lack of a better way to put it. Identity politics, socialism within the church, the GOP war over Trump, and the rage mob. So I'm going to talk about all of the things that you're not supposed to talk about at parties and with your Republican friends because it makes everybody angry. But I think we have to have these conversations because it's incredibly important. So just right off the bat, I came in from Miami this morning, and I was in Denver, Colorado, actually Boulder, Colorado, talking about the Second Amendment ordinance that they had just passed in that city. And I had some protesters that were out there, and there was a whole entire row of protesters that had just purchased tickets with the explicit tactic of standing up and walking out as I'm discussing possible solutions to quote-unquote gun violence. And so I challenged them. I said, well, unless you all are just a bunch of scenesters, unless you all are just a bunch of posers, I challenge you to stay in this room and let's talk about actual solutions as in good faith. Otherwise, then I'm going to assume you don't care about the same things that I care about. You're actually not interested at all in solving the violence problem. And so they stayed. They didn't get up and walk out, as we've seen so many times before. I mean, I love the optic of, just the hard battle and the arguing, but at some point, what is the point? If I'm not winning anybody over to my side, then we're just screaming at each other, and then I have to go drink that horrible throat coat tea from Walgreens so that I can go on air and do 3 hours of radio, and nobody wants to do that. So one of the ways that they always try to undermine people is with identity politics. And so it was scribbled in chalk on the sidewalks of the University of Colorado at Boulder that I was a fascist, which is news to me, and that I was a big racist because I believe in Jesus, I believe in my Second Amendment rights, and I just think that you should be cool to people. And apparently that is what defines racism and bigotry and everything else. So I'm just gonna make this really clear. The idea of racial supremacy is an unchristian view entirely contradicted by the Gospels. It's a sin. It is a sin. And it promotes the supremacy of one person over another, making identity an idol, and it supplants God in the order of sovereignty and worship. God did not make one of his children more redeemable than the other. But to falsely accuse someone of such a moral deficiency as some sort of substitute for a political argument is also a sin. The whole idea of identity politics is a very progressive view. It's a very progressive ideal because you are, instead of identifying as members of the kingdom, instead of identifying as children of God, you're identifying as A, B, C, D, or E. Pick your category. And that's not how we're supposed to view ourselves, and that's not how we're supposed to view each other. But this needs to be propagated so that you have statist entities that can take the place of God, can take the place of the church, so that government can become God. That is the entire point. It's to undermine God. And look, in the United States, you don't have to believe in God to enjoy the natural rights that come with it. Our rights come from the divine as affirmed by the Constitution. And this is why it is so incredibly important that we maintain this. Because as I said, even if you're not a Christian, even if you don't believe in God, your rights are still protected because they came from the divine. They were not created by men in court. And because they were not created by men, they're not under the dominion of men. And do you honestly trust your fellow man to handle all of that? Are we really honestly putting that much faith in our government? Do we trust a godless government to be fair in these matters? A godless government that has legalized abortion and we fund it to the tune of over $536 million a year. A government that has allowed over 300,000 veterans die while waiting to get the treatment they are owed from Veterans Affairs. This government that enslaved a people. This government that sent an entire ethnicity on the trail of genocide. This government? No. Our rights were not created by men. They were created by God, and you don't have to appreciate that to enjoy those. But it's all a part of that social justice. I've even been seeing this in the church, and I've been seeing this even in, which is unbelievable, social justice. Social justice has been bastardized, this phrase, because in the church, well, I mean, modern-wise, it is the state of distribution of equality, which is wrong. Biblically, social justice focused on the sharing of each other's burdens. Social justice focused on stewardship, being there for your fellow man in times of trouble, not leaving them out there for the fates, but intervening and saying, I'm here for you, I want to serve you, I want to help you. That is social justice as it's biblically defined. It's not the redistribution of wealth. And it's all about being guided by free will of the individual in a virtuous society, which is so unbelievably important. Like I said, those people who believe the state to be morally superior to the will of the individual later incorporated the act of distribution as being done by the giant hand of the state. The socialist definition is the equalization of person and equity, and merit is erased. And when you remove merit, you remove the incentive for ambition and unfairly diminish the equity of labor. And I say this as a poor child who was raised by a single mother until my preteens. Equality is not uniformity. Bernie Sanders said once at a political fundraiser that he does not believe in charity. That was his actual verbatim quote. He does not believe in charity. Socialists like Sanders, they outsource the responsibility of their stewardship because, and I'm just going to be honest, I shall not tell a lie, because they're lazy. They're lazy and they're selfish. So they outsource it to the state, who does a horrible job. I mean, it's not because certainly they can't be convinced that the government does a better job at stewarding of other people than they would do themselves. Socialists have no faith in the private individual because they worship the God of government. Oh, they're religious. It's just they worship Uncle Sam. That's what they do. And meanwhile, Christians and most Republicans and conservatives have no faith in government, but we worship the God of grace who calls his kingdom to be his hands and feet, and from their abilities bless those in need. That is what we're called to do. Faith, ladies and gentlemen, is freedom. It is freedom. I mean, just look at China and Hong Kong right now. It is absolutely the opposite of the restrictions of these tyrannies, which is why our rights were enshrined the way that they did, why the founders did it. The stewardship, like I said, never to be a function of a godless government, but we're not called upon to misuse our gifts and hide them for ourselves instead of acting in the service of other people. That's not what we're called to do at all. We are called to benefit those in need through the blessings or benefits that we have received through Christ. That's what we're called to do. We don't need the government. We're not going to blindly allocate it. And see, here's the other thing. When everyone, my son actually got into an argument with one of his teachers in high school because the teacher had suggested that Jesus was a socialist. And my child, who was raised in the church and has a preacher for a grandfather, and we do family devotionals, and we've been doing, I homeschooled him up till 8th grade, and we memorized scripture and everything else. So that was not a fun argument for that teacher. And by the way, my son is now 18 years old, and he's going into law, constitutional law. So if you think I'm a handful, get a load of him. And the reason, by the way, that stewardship is voluntary is because it's edification of the Spirit. That is why it is a brilliant dual purpose by a brilliant designer. Speaking of churches and all of that. David Platt is a pastor of a North Virginia church. I saw this story, and I have a book that is on some of this that's coming out this spring. David Platt was forced to apologize because he prayed for our president in his church. Well, I thought that was kind of interesting. He had to apologize to those disgruntled members of his congregation because he prayed for a sinner. Are we not all sinners? And I thought that it was kind of unbelievable. I guess his congregation was perfect. I guess those disaffected congregants thought that the president was beyond redemption and beyond prayer. And did they forget, and this is for everyone out there, especially certain individuals that I will not name who always say that, well, if you're a Christian and you vote for Trump, I guess you don't love Jesus anymore. Well, I guess you don't believe in an omnipotent, mighty, powerful God of grace who hasn't used people like David, who hasn't used the entire lineage of Jesus to bring forth the Savior that was the most imperfect line in all the Bible. And I guess you forget about Saul of Tarsus, who was the most murderous person of the era, and yet he was met on the road, because that is where God goes, to where you are, for all those individuals who make that complaint. So do the MSNBCs and the Huffington Post and the CNN and the ABCs and the NBCs and the alphabets X, Y, and G. For all of those individuals out there who try to say that Christians are somehow compromising ourselves because of our support for the president that we support, have you forgotten the boundless purpose of grace? And do you think that God is not able to use broken people, including you? A shepherd always leaves his flock to look for the one, every time. Now, look, I wasn't always this way. I very much empathize with the sons of thunder. I mean, when I was reading the Bible, and you all know, I've been doing this for a long time. You all know me. I'm a brawler. And I really identified with the sons of thunder, and I always thought, I don't know if it was ever meant to be humorous. I'm not going to put words in the Lord's mouth, but those were always the most entertaining passages of the Bible to me, because the sons were always like, well, Jesus, should we burn them? I mean, we just call some fire down, set them on fire. And they were always told, no, y'all need to calm down, no. But see, they were changed by the Lord, and their mission of persuading hearts and minds and saving souls was bigger than any display of authority that they were later granted to use. And I love that story. So I'm going to skip ahead because I have a lot of stuff to get into. The rage mob, never bend a knee to the rage mob. I'd never bend a knee except to God in prayer. That is the ultimate to bend a knee to. And I want really, one of the most, I think, powerful examples of this that I have ever seen was from Dan Cathy. And this is really what I wanted to just get into. Dan Cathy, who owns Chick-fil-A. Everybody knows those delicious and nutritious chicken sandwiches. There's one by my house, and I have to resist temptation. He never bent a knee to the rage mob. He didn't capitulate. He didn't surrender his faith. Y'all remember the story of Dan Cathy? He had given an interview, and this is a few years ago, and he just privately told this publication that, yes, he believes in traditional biblical marriage, right? So did Barack Obama. And for that, he was excoriated. The rage mob, they went to the Rent-A-Pitchfork store and Rent-A-Torch store. And they keep those people in business, by the way. In fact, I should actually open one here in D.C. if it's not against regulations. I'd make a lot of money, and then I could put it in the plate on Sunday. But they got really mad that Dan Cathy had done that, and so they decided that the rage mob was going to come for Dan Cathy, and boy, they were going to shut down Chick-fil-A. They were going to make it to where we couldn't get no chicken sandwiches. And Dan Cathy, he's like, all right. He didn't surrender anything. He didn't surrender his faith, nor belief, nor his free exercise of thought. Dan Cathy forfeited nothing. He gave up nothing. He surrendered nothing. His dual defense of faith and free thought is one of the most powerful and successful defenses in modern Christian and conservative history. It is. And what's more, he did it without a cross word. He did it without violence. He did it without political operatives. He did it without a PR firm or social media bots or anything else. Now look, there's a reason I've mentioned Sons of Thunder. Like I said, I know people are like, you're Dana Loesch, and you're saying we should be kinder to people. That I am Dana Loesch, and I'm saying that you should be kinder to people, should make hair on your arm stand up. I'm from the Ozarks. People take off flip-flops when it's time for business and hold one like this. I think that we are meant to live our lives in such a way that we evangelize without evangelizing. We are supposed to be an example. Our actions, our stewardship, we are to cause other people to question their lack of faith or their lack of ethics or their lack of morals, their lack of integrity. And Kathy and Chick-fil-A, they didn't respond to hate with hate. There was one recorded exchange. Do you all remember this? Because the protesters, they were going to go visit Chick-fil-A and they were going to demand free large waters. And then, if denied, the boycotter was going to cite Proverbs 25:21. If your enemy is hungry, give him food to eat. If he is thirsty, give him water to drink. And I thought, looking up Bible verses to own the cons, that's awesome. But the idea was that it was going to take money away from the company. And this took place in Arizona. A man named Adam Smith, who was then 37 years old, and it was at an Arizona Chick-fil-A, and he recorded himself verbally abusing a Chick-fil-A employee. Do y'all remember this video? It was a young woman, and her name was Rebecca. Or no, sorry, Rachel. Her name was Rachel, and he videotapes himself showing up, pulling up to the drive-thru, and he just starts leveling her. And this employee bore the abuse with a pleasant demeanor, still kept a smile. And she told Smith that she didn't feel the company was bad and that they serve and value all people. And he continued to harangue her, and each insult verbally, visibly wounded her. You could see her wince, every barb. It was really hard to watch. And then that video was posted online, and you know what the internet does. Smith, at the time, was the CFO of a medical device manufacturer. He took his water, he uploaded his video, and instead of receiving accolades, he was hit with a backlash tsunami. Internet sleuths found him. They found where he worked for. He lost his job. He lost his friends. His behavior made it into the press. He became a lead story. And he apologized, but it was too late. He ended up getting condemned by both the right and the left. And when he was unable to get another job, he ended up on food stamps. And he recorded another video of himself. This time he was apologizing to Rachel, who did not want her last name to be publicized. And he said, "I'm sorry for treating you so inhumanely." He says, "I compromised my personal integrity." He goes, "While I might not agree with everyone's views, I want to treat the other person with respect, and I did not do that to you." But it didn't matter to the rage mob, because you get what's coming to you. Except this rage mob was conservative. And I was part of it, if that's not convicting. So I had joyfully celebrated this man's very public fall. I thought, this is schadenfreude. He deserves it. He was mean. This is karma. This is justice. I had convinced myself it was justice, but not the kind that's in the good book. No, it wasn't in any book. It was just my idea of justice. We became him. Rachel granted one and only one interview, and that was to Fox Business with Stuart Varney, who was subbing for Neil Cavuto on that day. And she appeared with her fiance, who sat right by her side very silently. And Varney asked if she forgave Smith. And she says, quote, "I do forgive Adam Smith. I think he realizes how bad of a decision it was for him to make that tape. I feel really sorry for him and his family. It's not about Chick-fil-A, but about how one human being should treat another." And she said, "I'm glad that I could be an example of how we should serve each other." And she noted how Smith's issue was with the corporation, not the people. And she said that she had good training and a good upbringing. And asked if she was tempted to give back as good as she got, she replied, "Oh, sure. I mean, he was looking for me to react poorly. It's not my personality, and I would never do anything hateful in return to someone." Varney praised her. He said, "You're a hero. What you did is fantastic. What a great example." And she very humbly replied in one of the most profound sentences I think I've heard, quote, "I'm just a service worker doing my job." She ended with a response that she made to Smith. She says, "I forgive you, and I really hope that America will forgive you and treat you with the same respect that I chose to treat you with that day." Powerful. Smith wanted a bad reaction, and Rachel didn't give him one. She didn't, but a lot of us did. Who do you think left more of an impression on that man's heart? Rachel or the people screaming? The doxing, rage-filled individuals who hunted him down and exposed him after his very cruel behavior, don't get me wrong. Or was it the just a service worker who responded with strength and compassion? Some people think that compassion isn't a weakness. Compassion is the strongest thing you can do. And the reason we have so many angry people is because we have a lot of weak people out there. Hurt people. And that's what we see. Smith was publicly scorched. The bright side is I think that spiritual growth can come from being humbled sometimes in the same way that controlled burns can help improve the health of a field. Many of us missed a very valuable lesson in Rachel and Adam's exchange because in our zeal to see someone genuinely cruel get theirs, we became more like Adam in our response instead of Rachel. Rachel, the just a service worker who provided an example for a nation in more ways than one. This is the grace that we have to emulate if we're going to cancel the cancel culture. And we also need one other thing: redemption, reconciliation. If we're ever going to come together, don't deny people a redemptive path. For instance, the murder of Botham Jean and the trial of Amber Geiger, where I live in Dallas. Judge Tammy Kemp, afterwards, so everyone saw Brant, Botham's brother, exhibit a grace that, to be honest, I think that man who is a teenager might be more mature in his faith than me. And the forgiveness that he demonstrated shows that grace and justice can exist. And the Judge Tammy Kemp, got off that stand, and Amber Geiger said, "I don't think that I can be forgiven." And the judge gave her her own personal Bible with John 3:16 highlighted. Gave her a hug and said, "God loves you, and God forgives." Now, some atheist groups want to go at the judge for that. I would happily do a GoFundMe for that judge, and I will have that judge's six for the rest of her life because of that example that that woman gave. She's amazing. Thank you, Judge Kemp, for living your faith. Thank you for showing that grace and justice can exist. Ellen DeGeneres, you had it right when you said to be kind to everyone. The command God gives most frequently in the Bible is what? To love one another, to treat people like you want to be treated. Behavior, and hear me, everybody on the right and the left, behavior that is in disobedience of this command is sinful and it sits in judgment of God's will. Fight me on that. Change my mind. You won't. It is disobedience for sure. It is sinful. But see, it's not cool to be kind. It's cool to be tough. It's cool for the clickbait. It's cool to jump out there and fight with people and scream with people and get those views and go viral. And then in a few months, someone else gets out there and they get those views and they go viral. And then it happens over and over and over again. But does anything ever change? No. We just keep being driven further and further apart. And I question the motive of those individuals. And what is the point? If we're not convincing people, if we are not winning souls for the kingdom, if we're not changing hearts and minds, what is the point? There is a time for fury. There's a time for outrage. Slavery was an outrage. So the things that when we see people treated horrifically, that is a time for outrage. Outrage is not a tactic to be used every day. It is an expression against something so unbelievably heinous that is the only thing the soul can do. That is to be used only then. With all due respect to the great Johnny Rotten, anger is an energy, yes, but it is also a weakness. I'm going to end on this. I think maybe perhaps in faith and as I've gotten older, I've been in this for a very long time. I've done radio for 10 years now. I've done activism for longer. And as my children get older, you start to see things through their perspective. And I was really seeing what a very unkind political world we were shaping. And I thought, well, that's not very cool, especially since my kid's going to be able to out-debate me one day. We got to fix this. And you got to lead by example. You can't compel people. Virtue cannot be forced. You cannot compel people. You have to follow the ultimate blueprint. Christ never coerced anybody. He compelled them with his example. That is our blueprint going forward. That's the grace we should have. We have to convince people to follow, convince people with the merit of our argument and with our example. And sometimes it's not fun. Sometimes it's very satisfying to be as ignorant as you get it. But it goes against your stated objective. Strength is grace. Outrage should not be used every day because it burns the person who uses it most often. And remember, virtue cannot be coerced. We're all here because this is the Value Voters Summit, and our values should be grace, and our values should be redemption and reconciliation, and to follow the example that has been put before us by living a life so amazing that people are convinced to question their path and follow ours. God bless you all. Thank you.